Of course I do. This is a tough one because obviously people grieve differently, but here are some movies that I think are good for coping with the loss of a loved one and some that I've used personally. First one I thought of is The Sixth Sense. One of the greatest plot twists of all time, one of M. Night Shyamalan's greatest movies of all time. And for me, the coping part is that scene towards the end in the car with Cole and his mother, beautifully played by Toni Collette. That scene was just so beautifully done and well written and well acted. Just overall 10 out of 10 movie, honestly. Next, and this is a movie that I've talked about hundreds of times, but The Descent is one of my absolute favorites. Obviously, the main character, Sarah, is coping with the loss of her husband and her daughter. And I think this one is almost empowering for people who are experiencing a loss like that. This is a tough watch even if you aren't coping with the loss of somebody, so be careful with this one. But this is just such a beautiful and gut-wrenching movie, and it will absolutely devastate you in the best way possible. If you were to ask me which movie deals with grief in the best possible way, I would say The Babadook. This whole movie is a metaphor for grief and loss and what it can do to a person. And I think it was so well done, and it conveys a really important message about grief, I think. Ouija Origin of Evil is a movie that I really, really enjoy, much more than the original Ouija. And this is a Mike Flanagan movie, so no surprise there. Obviously, this movie deals with a lot of evil spirits that are inside this house, but it really focuses on the mother and her two daughters grieving the loss of her husband and their father. And I think there's some really beautiful moments about that in this film. The Night House is a movie that I watched relatively recently, and I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. And this one touches not only on grief, but also the afterlife and the fear that people have about that. And I think it's so wonderfully done. Like the cinematography, the acting, the writing, everything about it is perfect, honestly. A Quiet Place is really good at telling a story not only about grief, but grief in a post-apocalyptic world, and how grief can really affect a whole family. And I think this is another one that just tells that story really well. And the ending and the sacrifice at the end makes this one worth it. We Are Still Here is a movie that I've personally never talked about, and I really don't hear people talk about in general. This one stars our queen, Barbara Crampton. This one is about a couple grieving the loss of their child. And it does a really good job of showing how they work through that and overcome that, while also very much having its creepy moments. The Changeling is probably the most classic ghost story of all time. And George C. Scott starring in this movie is just incredible. And it's about him grieving the loss of his daughter and his wife. And this is another one that I think just does a really great job of dealing with the afterlife. This movie is just an absolute classic. I recommend it for everybody. And finally, not a movie, but my favorite show of all time. If you love this show, please look up how the 5 siblings represent the 5 stages of grief. It's so incredible. This is another Mike Flanagan show. It's beautifully written, it's beautifully shot, it's beautifully acted. The music, the atmosphere, the cinematography, everything about the show is fucking perfect. It's all about grief, and the way that it all comes together in the end is so beautiful. And I think it gives a lot of closure.